This is Prince George, BC. And like many cities in Canada, it has a really big problem. It isn't the cold winters or this strange giant logman who welcomes you into the town on the highway. It's a sneakier one. One of those hidden in plain sight problems that's really hard to see if you don't know what to look for. But if you look closely, you'll see it in the half-empty parking lots surrounding every store and every shopping center. It's in the subdivisions at the edge of the city, stretching further and further into the forest. It's a quiet problem, and it's slowly bleeding our city dry. And that problem has a name. It's urban sprawl. For decades, we've treated growth as something measured in square footage and new cul-de-sacs. More roads, more subdivisions, more strip malls. We counted all of these as wins, as signs of a city on the rise. And these things do look like progress. This is a growth strategy that, yes, has grown the physical size of the city, but it has completely inverted a much more important statistic, our density. Our city, by its own measurements, is completely outpaced by the other comparable municipalities in the province. We have far too few people living in far too large of a land area. Sprawl, at its most simple definition, is when cities spread outward into low-density, car-dependent subdivisions instead of growing inward with more compact and walkable neighborhoods. And let me be clear, simply using available city land to build outlying suburbs is not terminal for city budgets. It's when cities like PG begin relying heavily on new development dollars to pay for existing maintenance of the ever-expanding suburbs that you find yourself in what's called the growth Ponzi scheme. Let me explain that. When you build a new subdivision of single-family homes, particularly at the edge of the city, it requires new infrastructure: roads, lights, sewer, water, utilities, etc. This initial installation is, mostly, paid for by the developer of the new subdivision. This is where it feels like a win for the city, a new neighborhood, bought and paid for. But the ongoing cost of that, once installed, that's owned by the city, the taxpayers. We pay for that. Water mains that might break, road maintenance, snow plowing, line painting. This cost is borne by the city forever. So yes, these new subdivisions do provide an initial injection of cash to the city via the developer that pays for those initial costs. And as well, adding a new taxpayer base to an area that previously did not have taxpayers. This feels like a win. But on average, the lifetime cost of adding that new subdivision will outpace the injection of new tax dollars. Now, the reason they call this a Ponzi scheme is that these cumulative subdivision costs begin to add up exponentially over the years. And like all pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes, the system will break down if the growth begins to slow too much. Now, this is a well-documented phenomenon. There are whole YouTube channels dedicated to describing this problem in American and Canadian cities. So I want to spend a moment and completely break this down so we understand it. Okay, so I want to spend a bit of extra time on this because this is the whole point of the video. Over here, we have money coming into the city, and over here, we have time. This is years. Boom. And so as we've been talking about, a growing city is going to see money go up over time. This is consistent with what we know of development growth. And during this time, as we've talked about, developers are going to be paying for the roads and the utilities and the subdivisions. They're paying for that, as well as the fact that taxpayers are being added in new subdivisions. But then, as we just covered, after all of this is done, the developers stop paying for this, and those costs are passed off to the city. Growth is going to begin to slow here. And if growth slows too much, you're gonna start to see this happen, where the cost of maintaining that growth, those roads, subdivisions, utilities, is actually going to eat into the city budget. This is where the profit stops. And during this time, you start to see things like roads breaking down. You're gonna start to see things like water mains and utilities breaking. You're gonna start to have snow plowing and line painting costs add up. Now, as all of that's breaking down, the city can still pay for that by adding development. This is kind of what we're seeing now, right? You can pay for the existing infrastructure failure by adding new development. But as we know, those costs can come due. And so you start to see something that looks a little bit like this. Now, this right here is the problem. This is what this video is about, and this is where you get stuck if you keep developing at the edge of the city instead of using dense infill. Anyways, that was a really big long ramble. That's probably a separate video for another time. The point I'm trying to make is that this is the scary part. This is where I fear Prince George is or is getting close to, where we're using new development dollars to pay for failing infrastructure. And the problem with this is that even if you can grow your way out of it, you just re-enter this phase down the line, right? This exact model is only solved by dense infill, where you start to use existing infrastructure and existing roads and existing utilities to add more taxpayers and to intake those development dollars. I hope that makes sense. This was a bit of a divergence, but let's get on to the rest of the video. In 2022, the approved road rehabilitation capital budget for Prince George was $5.5 million. In 2024, that grew to $6.7 million. It's worth acknowledging that there are many pressures on road maintenance costs: inflation, higher snowfall years, etc. Sprawl is not the only contributor to that number going up. In a 2023 report, city staff acknowledged the structural nature of this problem, with labor costs and material costs going up by 25 to 50% in some cases. To me, this is not an either-or scenario. This is an and also. Those roads we've been adding for the last 20 years are coming up on their maintenance dates. This is now far more expensive to maintain than we could have ever projected when the development was approved. And so if we step back and zoom out, two things are true right now. Our city continues to sprawl at an unsustainable rate, and the cost of maintaining that sprawl is going up at an equally unsustainable rate. The city's core strategy of paying for that problem is only going to further bury us in the future. And depending on what financial timeline you're looking at, the city is already mostly broke, or it's going to be extremely broke in the coming decades. Another caveat worth mentioning, I think, is that it might sound like the case I'm making is that it's the developers or the realtors or that whole ecosystem, they're the villains of the story. And I just don't think it's that simple. Broadly speaking, most developers are just looking to maximize their profits and take on low levels of risk when choosing what kinds of developments to invest in. I don't see it as their fault that the incentive structures are set up in a way that makes more dense housing clusters less profitable or more risky. I think if you're asking me who I think the villains of the story are, honestly, it's a really boring answer. It's decades of mismanaged policy that have incentivized the wrong things. You know, it's the classic lack of education. So yeah, I just think it's worth mentioning that I don't see the developers as villains. And oftentimes these are people who are really invested in growing our city and really passionate about Prince George. So that's that one. The final caveat, and possibly the biggest one, is that suburban sprawl development is not always going to create a financial deficit. Now, everything we've discussed so far is true and heavily researched and documented in North American cities. There's a whole movement behind this called Strong Towns, and I would highly recommend looking into it if you're interested in this topic. That said, sprawling development, when managed properly, can still sometimes be revenue positive for a city, despite those eventual maintenance costs. In this way, pro-development viewers might be tempted to share examples of times where this is the case, even in Prince George. Look, Darren, the 2 new subdivisions in College Heights are 20 years in and are still net positive. Now, my response to that is twofold. One, even if it is net positive cash flow, suburban development is always going to be less effective in revenue generation than dense infill. So was it the best option for the city? No. And secondly, the city revenue aspect is only one part of why this development is terminal. Not just for financially healthy cities, but for a happy and functional city. All right, last chapter. Let's finish this thing up. Being broke as a city has many secondary effects on the residents. If we're looking to make walkability improvements to our downtown, maybe add some transit lines, add protected bike infrastructure, or maybe you've noticed our failing riverfront park paths. How far could an extra $2 million over 2 years go to improving the state of some of our high potential areas in town? And we haven't even dug into the ways in which this forces car dependence on the residents of Prince George, which is an additional cost all of us have to carry. You see, when you build your city like this, when everything is so sprawled, everything, work, groceries, hockey practice, it all requires driving. And that makes our lives lonelier, it makes them more stressful, less safe. Our kids can't bike to school, seniors find it harder to age in place. I mean, just grabbing a coffee with a friend is another 10-minute drive. And Prince George isn't struggling because people don't care. It's because the math of this sprawl just doesn't add up. And while we've been building out, we've been neglecting what's already here. Our downtown, the riverfront, core neighborhoods built on a human scale. And trust me, I get it. You might be watching this and thinking that the current problems facing Prince George are pretty far afield of this whole urban sprawl thing. Did 2 more subdivisions in the heart cause someone to burn down a beloved local brewery last month? No, of course not. There are much larger societal level problems at play here, and those are going to require multiple layers of intervention, not just a few apartment complexes. But, and I mean this very seriously, do you know what really helps cities trying to tackle some of these larger issues? Having some additional dollars in the city budget. Or at the very least, not having to increase taxes just to maintain service levels year over year. And having additional dollars in the city budget can allow us to do all kinds of things. We might be able to provide different breaks or incentives for downtown business owners. Maybe we can have a couple more downtown festivals to encourage people to get out and support those businesses. Maybe it's being able to staff a couple more bylaw enforcement officers or increase our RCMP budget. Maybe we can provide different housing or mental health and addiction supports for those who are homeless downtown. Okay, so we've been going on and on and on about the problems and the issues, but what is actually the solution? Well, I've been saying it this whole time, but we have to focus on infill now. Building dense housing clusters on existing or at least partially developed land that is close to the city's core, prioritizing things like shared wall housing, apartments, condominiums. This is already happening here, and we just need more of it. I think looking ahead, we need to pay really close attention to our municipal politics and the kinds of people who are guiding our city. When elections come up, we need to elect candidates who are pro-density and pro-infill. And we need to ask serious questions of the councillors who've been guiding the sprawling development so far. I really love this city. I wouldn't have spent weeks of my life making this video if I didn't believe there was something really important here. I really hope that this video helps us see the issue that's been hiding in plain sight in front of us for decades. And thank you so much for watching.